So I think those were two of my biggest goals. And then obviously college basketball has come true, and then hopefully the WNBA here.
The WNBA has just shattered every record in women's sports history. Arenas are selling out. Television ratings have surged by more than 500%. Charter flights have finally arrived for players, and the league has secured a massive $2 billion media deal. And at the center of it all is Caitlin Clark. When Clark entered the league, everything changed almost overnight. But behind closed doors, inside the Players Association, something very different is happening. Instead of celebrating the league's biggest financial boom ever, many veterans who helped build the WNBA appear deeply frustrated, and some are even preparing for a fight. The same union that should be celebrating the league's sudden success is now pushing a strategy that could potentially wipe out many of those gains in a single move. And strangely, much of the mainstream sports media seems reluctant to talk about it. Just a few years ago, the idea that the WNBA would become one of the hottest sports stories in America would have sounded unbelievable. The league had been operating at a loss for years, with the National Basketball Association quietly subsidizing operations to keep franchises running. Attendance numbers were modest. Many arenas were only partially filled, sometimes drawing crowds comparable to minor league sports. Sponsors were scarce, television networks showed little interest, and the league survived largely because the NBA chose to keep supporting it. Then the 2024 season arrived, and everything changed. Caitlin Clark entered the Indiana Fever as the #1 overall draft pick. What followed was not just a great rookie season, it was a transformation of the entire business of women's basketball. Almost instantly, the financial landscape shifted. Indiana Fever games delivered the highest television viewership in WNBA history. The 2024 draft alone attracted 45 million viewers, a staggering 307% increase compared with the previous year. Across the league, national TV ratings more than doubled during the regular season. Arena after arena sold out. Teams that had struggled to fill seats suddenly had waiting lists for season tickets. Even teams that Clark never played for experienced record attendance. The Connecticut Sun sold out every home game for the first time in franchise history, despite Clark not even being on their roster. Her presence in the league lifted interest across the entire competition. Merchandise sales told a similar story. Within weeks of the draft, Clark's Fever jersey became the top-selling jersey in all of women's professional sports. Retailers struggled to keep it in stock, and Indiana Fever merchandise began appearing in cities with no previous connection to Indiana basketball. On the court, Clark delivered as well. During her rookie season, she broke the WNBA's all-time rookie scoring record, a mark that had stood for decades. She won Rookie of the Year and earned an All-Star selection in her first season. By October, she had signed a lifetime shoe deal with Nike, reportedly worth around $28 million, the largest endorsement deal in women's basketball history. By the end of the season, Clark had become one of the most watched athletes in American sports, regardless of league or gender. The league quickly capitalized on the momentum. In October 2024, the Women's National Basketball Association announced a landmark media rights agreement worth $2 billion over 11 years with partners including Amazon, NBC, ESPN, and ION Television. The scale of that deal shocked the sports world. For comparison, the previous television contract had been worth roughly $60 million over 6 years. The new agreement represented a 37-fold increase in value in a single negotiating cycle. Other long-requested changes finally followed. Charter flights, something players had demanded for years while traveling commercially between games, were introduced. Expansion discussions began, with cities such as San Francisco, Portland, and Cleveland pushing to secure new franchises. Corporate sponsors returned. Ticket prices increased. Television broadcasts moved into prime-time slots. Every major indicator pointed in the same direction. A golden era for the WNBA had begun. The Indiana Fever transformed from a relatively overlooked franchise into one of the most talked-about teams in American sports. Their home games became major events, and their road games routinely sold out arenas across the country. Caitlin Clark was no longer just a basketball story. She had become a cultural moment, the kind that leagues wait decades for. Which leads to a question many commentators are hesitant to address openly. If the league is finally thriving, if fans are filling arenas, if networks are investing billions, and if sponsors are lining up, why is the Players Association now preparing for a confrontation that could potentially shut everything down? In January 2025, the WNBA Players Association made a surprising move.
And you have these things that you're doing a lot of sports. When did you start crystallizing on basketball and what this could look like?
The union voted to opt out of the existing collective bargaining agreement 2 years before it was scheduled to expire. That agreement governs player salaries, travel conditions, benefits, and working rules. At first glance, the decision appeared logical. With new media money flowing into the league, players naturally wanted to renegotiate their share of the growing revenue. Labor negotiations like this are common across professional sports. However, once details of the union's demands began to surface, the situation became far more complicated. The opt-out triggered a hard deadline. If a new agreement could not be reached before the 2025 season began, the union would have the legal right to strike. That would mean no games, no season, and no Caitlin Clark on television. The union's official demands included higher salary caps, larger team rosters, improved maternity protections, and expanded mental health resources. These are issues many observers consider reasonable for a league experiencing rapid financial growth. But as negotiations progressed, the discussion began to move beyond salaries and working conditions. Some of the union's most vocal leaders started raising broader concerns about how the league markets its stars, who receives the most promotion, and what kind of identity the WNBA should present to the public. Veteran guard Natasha Cloud, one of the louder voices in the players' union, publicly argued that even a $200,000 salary increase for mid-level players would not be sufficient once taxes and high living costs in cities like New York City were considered. And that is where the conversation surrounding the league's future began to grow far more complicated. Veteran guard Natasha Cloud argued that once federal and state taxes are deducted, players living in expensive cities would not truly feel the benefit of a proposed salary increase. In places like New York City, she explained, the cost of housing alone could quickly swallow much of that raise. Technically, the point was not entirely wrong. Taxes are real, and New York is undeniably one of the most expensive cities in the United States. But the way the argument was framed revealed a deeper misunderstanding about how audiences perceive wealth and fairness. The average household income in the United States sits at roughly $75,000 per year, according to data from the United States Census Bureau. For many fans sitting in the upper rows of an arena, fans who might have spent $60 on a ticket, bought a $45 jersey, and driven hours to attend the game, hearing a professional athlete say that $200,000 is not enough money does not inspire sympathy. Instead, it risks creating something closer to resentment. And resentment rarely translates into ticket sales for the following season. That concern was voiced publicly by Rebecca Lobo, a WNBA Hall of Famer who now works as one of ESPN's most prominent analysts. Lobo pointed out that the Women's National Basketball Association had spent decades fighting for credibility and survival. For years, the league operated with financial support from the National Basketball Association. Teams often played in partially filled arenas while executives worked tirelessly to secure limited television coverage and reluctant sponsorship deals. Every step forward had required patience and persistence. Statements suggesting that a six-figure salary was insufficient, Lobo warned, risked handing critics exactly the ammunition they had always been waiting for, the argument that the league was undeserving of serious investment. Meanwhile, team owners were watching the situation unfold with increasing concern. Several franchise groups had already committed significant capital toward expansion bids, arena improvements, and upgraded player facilities, largely motivated by the league's new multi-billion-dollar media deal. They had placed a major bet on growth. But the public tone coming from some union representatives was beginning to make that bet look unstable. Despite the backlash, some of the loudest voices within the Players Association did not soften their stance. Instead, they doubled down in interviews on social media and during negotiations. The rhetoric grew sharper. The demands remained firm. And with each passing week, The window for a smooth resolution grew smaller. Beneath the surface, however, a deeper fracture was forming, not simply between players and owners, but within the players' union itself. Professional sports unions rely on one fundamental principle: unity. Whether it is a superstar earning millions or a rookie on the minimum salary, the strength of a union depends on players standing together. Collective action gives the organization its negotiating power. History across leagues, in baseball, football, and basketball, has repeatedly shown that once a union fractures publicly, the balance of power shifts immediately toward ownership. Management does not need to outmaneuver a divided union.
Especially throughout even middle school, I was still doing a bunch of different sports, and once I got into high school, I was just doing basketball.
They simply wait for it to collapse under its own weight. By early 2025, the WNBA Players Association was facing exactly that problem. The disagreements within the union were not minor tactical differences. They reflected deeper divisions shaped by financial security, career stage, and even broader cultural perspectives. On one side were many veteran players, athletes who had built long careers and supplemented their income with lucrative overseas contracts in countries such as Turkey, Spain, France, and Russia. During the WNBA offseason, top players often earn between $300,000 and $500,000 playing in European leagues. That income provides a significant financial cushion. For those athletes, missing a WNBA season would be inconvenient, but not necessarily devastating. Many of these players were also the most supportive of the union leadership's broader framing of the labor dispute. For them, the negotiations were not just about salary figures, but about larger cultural and political questions surrounding the league's future. On the other side were the league's working players. These included mid-tier veterans earning between $80,000 and $130,000 per season, second-year players still learning how to manage their first professional contracts, and rookies who had not yet secured international opportunities. While those salaries may sound substantial at first glance, the reality is more complicated. Taxes, agent commissions, training costs, and the fact that the WNBA season lasts only about 5 months all reduce the practical value of those earnings. For many players, the WNBA salary is not supplemental income. It is their primary income. For them, a strike or lockout is not simply a negotiating tactic. It represents a direct threat to their ability to pay rent, cover medical costs, and support family members who rely on them. These two groups were not just debating strategy. They were operating from entirely different financial realities. And within the union's leadership structure, the voices receiving the most attention often belonged to those with the greatest financial safety net. The internal fracture eventually became visible in public. Players began speaking out, not privately in locker room conversations or team chats, but openly in interviews and social media posts. One of the most notable voices was Kelsey Plum, a championship-winning guard with a long and decorated career. Plum made it clear that she wanted to keep playing. She warned that the league had built something rare and fragile during the 2024 season, momentum that could easily disappear if the season were canceled during a labor dispute. According to her, destroying that momentum over negotiations that could still be resolved at the table made little sense. Another influential player, Breanna Stewart, echoed a similar sentiment. Stewart is one of the most recognized stars in women's basketball and has the financial security to remain silent if she chooses. Instead, she publicly signaled support for continuing negotiations rather than escalating the conflict. Their decisions carried weight. Other players began expressing similar concerns. Some did so carefully, leaving room for interpretation. Others were far more direct. Social media posts began circulating that described union leadership as greedy or selfish, written by players who were technically part of the same organization. Sports commentator Jason Whitlock summed up the situation bluntly. According to him, the Players Association appeared to be losing control of its own narrative, with members contradicting leadership publicly. Whether one agrees with that assessment or not, the visible divisions were undeniable. A labor union whose members openly challenge its leadership online is not operating from a position of strength. It is an organization struggling to maintain internal consensus while making decisions that carry enormous financial consequences. For the league's middle-tier players, the situation creates a painful dilemma. Remaining silent may mean watching their financial security treated as acceptable collateral damage by players whose overseas contracts provide a safety net. But speaking out risks publicly weakening the union that is supposed to represent them. Behind closed locker room doors, the real conversation is not just about salaries or television deals. It is about who ultimately bears the cost if negotiations collapse. And that leads directly to another uncomfortable topic, one that many commentators in the sports media world prefer to avoid discussing openly. For some veteran players, the rapid rise of Caitlin Clark has created a complicated mixture of admiration, frustration, and resentment. It is not simply envy. For certain players, the attention surrounding Clark has begun to influence real decisions about the league's future, decisions that could carry serious financial consequences for everyone involved. This is not speculation.
So I do think there's a piece of you, having to keep up with the boys. You're an MVP of a boy.
The pattern has been visible since Caitlin Clark stepped onto a WNBA court for the first time. During the summer of 2024, Clark found herself on the receiving end of unusually physical play. Veteran opponents frequently made aggressive contact that led to flagrant fouls, heated debates among commentators, and national headlines. Players such as Angel Reese of the Chicago Sky and Chindi Carter were involved in several incidents that quickly circulated across sports media. The attention surrounding those moments grew so intense that the conversation often shifted away from Clark's performance on the court and focused instead on how she was being treated by opposing players. Off the court, the reactions were equally revealing. Within weeks of the draft, Clark's merchandise sales surpassed those of every other player in the Women's National Basketball Association combined. When she was selected first overall by the Indiana Fever, it marked one of the biggest commercial moments in the league's history. Yet many veteran players did not publicly celebrate the surge in attention. Instead, several took to social media to discuss themes of fairness and recognition. Some argued that the sudden spotlight was overlooking the athletes who had spent years building the league during its most difficult periods. The implication was difficult to ignore. For some veterans, Clark's success did not feel like a collective victory for the WNBA. It felt like the league rewarding the wrong person. At its core, the issue is about power. For decades, the WNBA operated within a tight-knit internal hierarchy. Players who endured the league's early struggles helped establish its culture and standards. They determined what behavior was acceptable and shaped the identity of the league. Because mainstream media coverage was limited, those veteran players largely controlled the narrative surrounding women's professional basketball. Clark's arrival disrupted that balance almost instantly. In a single season, a rookie from Iowa received more mainstream attention than many established stars had experienced throughout their entire careers. Sponsorship deals that had rarely existed in women's basketball suddenly appeared. Television contracts that once seemed impossible became reality. But much of that attention centered on one player. For veterans who believed they had laid the foundation for the league's growth, watching that shift unfold was understandably difficult. Human reactions to displacement are rarely purely logical. They are emotional. And when influential figures respond emotionally, the consequences can extend far beyond their personal frustrations. Some analysts who specialize in sports labor relations have suggested that the current push toward a potential work stoppage may not be driven solely by salary negotiations. They argue that the conflict may also reflect a deeper struggle over control. If certain veteran leaders feel they can no longer shape how the WNBA presents itself, who becomes the face of the league and what direction it takes, then forcing a reset through labor pressure could restore their influence. A strike would immediately halt the league's momentum. It would freeze Clark's rapid rise and remind everyone that without the players' cooperation, the league cannot function. Whether that calculation is deliberate or simply the byproduct of rising tensions is difficult to determine. But the potential consequences are very real. To understand what is truly at stake, it helps to step back from player politics and examine the business realities of a work stoppage. The WNBA's new media rights agreement is valued at approximately $2 billion over 11 years. That revenue is distributed across the league's 12 franchises while also covering operating costs and league-wide investments. It provides a strong foundation for growth, but it is not an unlimited financial safety net. Television networks that invested in broadcasting rights expect content. If a season disappears, those networks do not quietly absorb the loss. They renegotiate contracts, demand reduced fees, or activate exit clauses that allow them to walk away. In other words, the leverage in this situation may not be as straightforward as it appears. Team owners could survive a shortened season more easily than television partners can tolerate empty programming slots, and more easily than many players can survive without paychecks. The ripple effects would spread quickly. Arena employees lose work shifts. Local vendors lose sales. Team staff members, the people responsible for logistics, communications, and daily operations, face layoffs. These individuals are not wealthy athletes or executives. They are ordinary workers whose livelihoods depend on games actually taking place. The fan base is perhaps the most fragile element of all. The dramatic rise in viewership during the 2024 season was not evenly distributed across the league. A disproportionate share of national television ratings came from games involving the Indiana Fever. Clark's appearances drew viewership numbers that many franchises had never experienced before. In simple terms, a large portion of the new audience arrived specifically to watch her play. If a work stoppage removes Clark from television screens for an entire season, those new viewers are unlikely to wait patiently for the league's return. They are not longtime WNBA loyalists who have followed the league since its founding. Many are new sports fans who discovered women's basketball through one extraordinary player. If she disappears from the spotlight, their attention will likely shift elsewhere. Sports economists often reference the 1994 Major League Baseball strike as a cautionary example. That labor dispute canceled the World Series for the first time in decades and severely damaged the sport's relationship with fans. Attendance did not fully recover until the late 1990s, and even that resurgence was later overshadowed by the controversies of the steroid era. Baseball had more than a century of cultural tradition supporting it. The WNBA does not yet possess that level of institutional resilience. Right now, the league has one extraordinary rookie, one explosive surge in popularity, and one historic opportunity. If a labor conflict erases the 2025 season, the damage could be far more difficult to repair. That is precisely the outcome that players like Kelsey Plum, Breanna Stewart, and many mid-tier athletes hope to avoid. The question is whether the loudest voices inside the players' union are prepared to listen. The WNBA has just experienced the most significant season in its history. The money arrived. The fans arrived. The cameras arrived. Instead of securing that momentum for the next decade, a faction within the Players Association appears willing to risk it all in a struggle over influence and direction. Many mid-tier players are deeply anxious about what comes next. New fans are only one poor decision away from drifting away. Television networks are watching closely. The future is not yet decided. Reasonable voices inside the union can still push for compromise. Owners can continue negotiating in good faith. The season can still happen. But someone has to stop playing politics with the game itself. And if you want to keep following the stories behind the headlines, the ones many mainstream outlets avoid discussing, stay tuned, because the next move in this story may shape the future of women's basketball.